Hayes to speak on sexual violence against men and boys, the impact. This training series is brought to you by the National American Indian and Alaska Native Addiction Technology Transfer Center, or ATTC. We are one of 4 national focus centers serving the network, shown on this slide. The network also includes 10 regional centers and a network coordinating office. To learn more, please visit our website. Our center is a NADAC certified educational provider, and we'd be happy to provide you with CEUs for a $15 fee. The CEU request form is available for download in the Files pod in the webinar screen, and we will also be sending this out in a follow-up email to all who attended. Immediately following today's webinar, actually this won't be happening today. We will not immediately redirect to our GIPR evaluation, but we will send you a link in our follow-up email, which should come tomorrow. SAMHSA asks us to evaluate our events in order to provide improved performance assessment and accountability. The survey asks about your satisfaction with the event and will take less than 10 minutes to complete. We thank you in advance for helping us to improve our programs. You will be muted for the duration of this webinar. We wanted to take a couple moments just to give a little bit of a warning. As you can tell from the title of today's topic, this is going to be a very sensitive discussion, and our presenter Lenny is going to be sharing some of his own personal experience, and we want everyone to know, for one thing, that there is going to be some graphic material that's covered. So if that is something that might be difficult for you to see, you may want to think about that in advance. And also, we want to make sure everyone knows the Q&A. We will keep those anonymous. We will not share your questions with everyone. We also may not have time to address questions during the session today, but we will take down all questions, and Lenny is planning to respond to those and as much as he possibly can after the session today. So please don't hesitate to submit questions, and we will make sure that those are addressed at a certain point. And now that we have gone through all those announcements, I want to introduce everyone to Lenny Hayes. He is a member of the Sisseton Wahpeton Oyate of the northeast corner of South Dakota. Currently, Lenny is running his own consulting company called Tate Topa, and he has training in mental health issues and the impact of Two-Spirit and LGBTQ in the Native American community. He has always worked within the Native American community, and his lived experience and training have made him a sought-after workshop presenter on Native American historical and intergenerational trauma. That's part of the reason we really wanted to bring Lenny to discuss this particular topic today. Currently, I also wanted to let people know that he has been selected as an independent consultant for the Office of Victims in Crime, addressing Two-Spirit and Native LGBTQ issues. So we are excited to have Lenny here to share on this topic. It is something that does not get discussed very often at all, and so I just want to thank Lenny so much for being willing to bring this topic to light and to share it with us today. And I'll pass things over to you at this time.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very excited about being able to present this topic today, because this is definitely a topic that we don't talk about, sexual violence against men and boys. So first of all, as a Native American person, this is how I introduce myself. Again, I'm from the Sisseton Wahpeton Oyate of the northeast corner of South Dakota. I am a mental and chemical health therapist consultant. I am owner and operator of Tate Topa Consulting. I'm an educator, an advocate, and motivational speaker, and I also call myself a Dakota Two-Spirit Weekta, and I am also a survivor of adult and child sexual abuse. So I'm going to start out with the presentation with giving just a brief summary of what is sexual violence. Sexual violence is when a person uses tricks, power, threats, or violence to have sexual contact with another adult. It is called rape or sexual assault. When the individual is a victim of a relative, people often use the phrase incest. When the child is a victim of an adult, it is called child molestation. What is sexual abuse? Sexual abuse is sexual contact without consent. Children do not consent because they often do what adults tell them to do. So here are some types of sexual abuse. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I will talk a little bit about some of them. An adult sexually touching a child, male or female. Now we know that sexual abuse happens. The perpetrator is often men and also can be women too. Having a child touch the adult sexually, male or female. Photographing the child for sexual purposes, sexual talk, showing the child pornographic material or making them available to the child, exposing genitals to the child, masturbation or otherwise being sexual in front of the child, voyeurism, verbal and emotional abuse of sexual nature, engaging the child in prostitution, and witnessing others being sexually abused. Often people want a little more description of that, and normally what I tell people is if a child sees two individuals having sex, that is also a form of sexual abuse. There's been reports of that happening or has happened to a child. So here are some common forms of sexual touching of a child. Touching or fondling the child's genitals, buttocks, anus, or nipples. Touch can also come in form of sexual hugs or rubbing, where the adult rubs her or his body against the child. This also includes clothing on the child and the adult. This is really important to know that sometimes, most often, boys are more reluctant to disclose than girls when it comes to child sexual abuse or sexual violence. Children who are victims of a family perpetrator often delay disclosure longer than a non-family member. And I'll talk a little bit about that more in the upcoming slides. A child is affected by sexual abuse when he may question his ability to defend himself or may not trust his body to function in times of crisis. He may question his body and say, what did I do to invite this? He may begin to hate his body. He may begin to not respect his body or the surroundings around him. Often will begin to use alcohol, drugs, or over or under eating and smoking as a teen. Now, when I talk about he may begin to hate his body, often people do not realize that people who are sexually abused will often wear baggy clothes so that it doesn't bring attention to themselves. You know how sometimes people sexualize individuals with tight clothes or whatever, so usually a survivor of sexual abuse will often wear baggy clothes just because they just don't want that attention brought to themselves. A child is affected by sexual abuse when disassociation happens due to, it could possibly happen when something may trigger that child to remember that event. And often too, one of the things that I talk about when I talk about trauma with children and even adults, that when someone experiences trauma, often we don't realize that the brain protects us. So often what will happen sometimes when we talk about disassociation is that the event disappears, but will come back in different ways through triggers. It could be a smell, It could be a touch. It can be a place that the individual may be at, which would cause a memory of the sexual abuse. Even after the abuse stops, the child may feel he is ineffective, powerless, and worthless. He has learned from being abused that what he does, wants, feels, or thinks makes no difference. And with that statement, I like to remind people is that it's usually a child who is sexually molested more than once or sexually abused more than once. He will continue to question himself. Why did this happen? Why didn't anyone stop it? Why didn't I tell someone? A child is affected by sexual abuse when the mental and emotional, the child believes that he had a choice, but in reality the abuse was inflicted upon him. A boy faces confusion and isolation when he is sexually abused by a woman. And when we talk about that, we talk about sometimes what happens in the male world is that males will often trivialize or romance his story when the boy wants to talk about being sexually abused. And often it's sort of like men praise what happened to him because that's how male masculinity is taught in regards to that when something like that happens. I'm not saying it does all the time, but it does occur. The boy is often faced with society's perception that he may try to fit in and begins to brag or joke about the sexual abuse or the sexual violence that happened to him. If any of the experience felt good, he was not abused. If he did not enjoy it, he must be homosexual. That's a belief that people believe. A child is affected by sexual abuse when not knowing how to cope with his confusion. He may push it back in his mind, losing all conscious memory of the event until years later. It is said that the male survivors are more likely to repress memories of abuse by women than by men. So I'm going to discuss now a little pieces of the child that are lost when a child is sexually abused. Loss of memory of childhood. If a child has to deny or forget what has happened to him, he may find as an adult that he literally lost his childhood. A great many of survivors have little or no memory of childhood. Now, I'm going to go a little bit in depth with that in regards to that. Often when there is repeated sexual abuse, what happens is that even a child will lose good memories of his childhood. I'm going to give you an example. Like I said earlier, I am a survivor of child sexual abuse. And one of the things that I do not remember is that I don't remember a lot of my own childhood. I remember bits and pieces of my childhood. But the things that I'm glad that I've been able to hold on to is my memories of my grandmother. So one of the things that happens to me, and which I'm very happy that this happens, is that when I smell the smell of bacon, it reminds me of my grandmother, because I remember as a child being able to go and stay with my grandmother for the weekend or whatever, and I would always remember her cooking on a Saturday morning for her grandchildren. So to me, that's a good memory to have. But some of the abuse that I encountered as a child, I do not remember. When I was on my own healing journey and I was in therapy, often sometimes my own siblings would say, well, do you remember when this happened, when it referred to something bad that happened? And I could not remember it. So I would go back to my own therapist and I would discuss this with her. And finally she just said to me, she said, why would you want to remember the bad things that happened to you? And explained to me what I said earlier about, how our brain protects us when it comes to trauma. So I am much happier that I don't remember some of the bad things that happened to me, but I do remember some of them. Loss of healthy social contact. When a little child feels that his only safety is in isolation, it seriously impairs his ability to respond to others. The perpetrator may also enforce his isolation. Now, one of the things that happened to me when I was being sexually abused by a stepbrother, what had happened was it was from the age of 9 to 10 years old that I was sexually abused by him, and it happened more than once. It happened quite a number of times. But the crazy thing about it was that in the beginning, he instilled a lot of fear in me when I was being sexually abused. At the end of being abused, I started to protect him, meaning, which I'm going to go into a little bit more when I talk about the mental health piece. But one of the things also, too, was that the isolation part that I experienced was that I was afraid to be around others. Like I said, my perpetrator also threatened me. The loss of opportunity to play. To play may be difficult for an abused child because he cannot relax to trust others. He may feel out of control. Well, often too, a child can isolate and play by himself also because he just doesn't know how to respond to others because of the fear of maybe being abused, or even people finding out that he or she is being abused. A loss of opportunity to learn. Children learn through play. Childhood games incorporate cultural values. Children learn to understand and take charge of their environment. They learn communication, cooperation, competition, problem solving, coordination, motor skills, creativity, age-appropriate and gender-appropriate behavior, and they share information. When sexual abuse occurs, this can be lost or can be limited to learning. Loss of control of one's body. Sexual abuse violates a child's sense of himself in the most basic way. When someone takes control of his body against his will, he feels he has no right to his body. Loss of normal, loving, nurturing environment. Every child deserves to be loved. Every child needs to be cherished and nurtured. When sexual abuse happens, all of this disappears. The child may feel the loss of safety in the world. He may have difficulty in developing healthy adult intimacy, feelings of belonging, and a strong sense of his own value. Other losses. This could go on and on. Family, identity, and so on, leads to further losses in adult life. The boy who was sexually abused loses self-esteem, self-confidence, self-maturation, intimacy, comfort, and security as an adult. I'm going to go into a little more in depth in the mental health piece. Did you know the loss that boys and men experience in their early years leaves lifelong scars and pain? Boys who do not fit the traditional macho image are marginalized, ostracized, harassed, and physically punished. Bullying results in trauma. The trauma that males experience is lethal, large, and hard to work through. But I do want to say, though, that it is possible for an adult male to work through his own sexual trauma. I am a fine example of that. I went through 10 years of extensive therapy in regards to work through my own sexual trauma. So I do believe that men can recover from child sexual abuse. Many men who have hurt others may have been hurt themselves. So I want to share with you some common misconceptions about child sexual abuse. Myth: children are most likely to be sexually assaulted by a stranger. Fact: 75 to 95% of offenders are known and may be related to the child. Another myth: children lie or fantasize about sexual activities with adults. In developmental terms, young children cannot make up explicit sexual information. They must be exposed to it and speak their own experiences. Sometimes parents will try to get the child to lie. Myth. When a boy is being sexually abused by a male, it is often said that the adult is homosexual. Fact. Most child sexual abuse is perpetrated by men who are heterosexual and do not find sex with other men at all attractive. Another myth. If children did not want it, they could say stop. The fact. Children generally do not question the behavior of adults. They are often coerced by bribes, threats, and use of authority. When a boy and a woman have sex, it's a boy's idea and he is not being abused. Child abuse is an act of power by which an adult uses a child. Abuse is abuse. A woman abusing a child is still a child abuser. Child molesters are all dirty old men. In a recent study of convicted child molesters, 80% were found to have committed their first offense before the age of 30. Males who were sexually abused as boys will grow up to abuse children sexually. Fact. Only a portion of abused boys go on to abuse children. Now, a lot of this information was taken from Abused Boys, the Neglected Victim of Sexual Abuse by Mick Hunter. And the reason why, a lot of the information is taken from his book is that there is not a lot of studies that are done on men and boys who have been sexually abused as children. And we know that. There's not a lot of research that's out there. So a lot of this is through his book and through my own personal experience with sexual abuse. And one of the things that I really want to make sure is that there is a lot of similarities to what I'm presenting today with individuals who are survivors of sexual abuse, and not every child experiences the same thing. So it's really important to know that. So here's the next piece. As adult males, the impact of child sexual abuse. Now, in this recent study, I've also attached the link, but this study was done by the National Institute of Justice Research Report, Violence Against American Indian and Alaska Native Women and Men. This was a 2010 findings. So the link is attached, but I wanted to put some major pieces that were taken from this report that 1 in 4 American Indian and Alaska Native men have experienced sexual violence in their lifetime. More than 1 in 10 have experienced sexual violence with penetration. And overall, more than 475,000 American Indian and Alaskan Native men have experienced sexual violence in their lifetime. Now, these are the ones who were reported. What I know of is that there's also men who have not come forward to identify that they are survivors of child sexual abuse. Now, one of the things, this study was done by Dr. Karina Walters way back in 2008. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to compare the Two-Spirit community versus the heterosexual community in results to all forms of violence. Now, to the left is the child physical abuse. That's the heterosexual, that's the Two-Spirit side versus the heterosexual side on your right side. The left side is the Two-Spirit. So I wanted to put that in there so that you can be able to begin to think about why. I know we don't have a lot of time to discuss that, but one of the things that I like to discuss is the issues that impact the Two-Spirit community. But it's really important to know that one of the things that we know of is often anyone who identifies as a Two-Spirit, male or female, or transgender, are often targeted more because of their sexual identity versus a heterosexual person. So it's really important. So I really wanted to add this this study that was done by Dr. Karina Walters. She went to the six of the largest Two-Spirit communities in the nation and gathered all this data. So what are some of the reasons why male sexual abuse victims are underidentified? Often, sometimes, what I experienced as a child, which I like to talk about because, and especially when I'm presenting to other mental health professionals, so being a 48-year-old male versus when I was a child, 30 years ago, when I was first forced into going into therapy, what the psychologist did to me was he was more interested in my sexual identity rather than the trauma that I experienced as a child. So he never gave me an opportunity to really discuss the trauma that I experienced. So that was one of the bad types of therapy that I experienced. So I'm often always telling people that it's important to ask your client what they want to talk about, and not sort of think we know what they want to talk about. Sometimes therapists are really uncomfortable discussing child sexual abuse with an adult, or they don't know how. So often, sometimes when that happens, it makes it really difficult for an individual to discuss their own sexual abuse. So it's really important to get trained, understand, I mean, why you as a mental health professional are uncomfortable about talking about sexual abuse. You know, so this piece is really important. I really like to discuss this with people. Of course, you know, when I began as a therapist too, there were many things that I didn't feel very confident in talking about. So the more that I would ask the question, were you sexually abused as a child, the more better it became for me to be able to ask individuals and be okay with it. But the most important part is like creating a safe place for someone to begin to talk about their own trauma. Why do men wait to seek professional help? Well, abuse could still be too fresh. It may not yet been defined as abuse, meaning that we can tell individuals when we believe or think that they were abused, but it's really important for the person to come to that place to define their own abuse. The perpetrator may still got you to keep silent. Now, I've worked in several different areas where, or I've had discussions with men who, even as adults, will run into their perpetrator out in the community, and all of a sudden will get triggered and would have these violent thoughts of attacking their perpetrator, or sometimes would literally shut down because it got to be too much for them. So, so we really need to understand why men don't seek professional help. There's fear. Even though the abuse may be over, it can still feel dangerous. Even a dead perpetrator's presence can be felt strongly. The time and place may not be right to disclose. The individual may not know he has options. The feelings of being weak, battered, and hopeless take action. Self-blame, shame. Shame is huge in regards to why a lot of men don't talk about their own sexual abuse, especially if they're abused by men, because then often people think that that they're homosexual, and that's not always true. Men who are violent are often sent a message as a child: be strong, be sexually active, be straight, be independent, don't ask for help, don't cry and show vulnerability, focus on the goal and not the process, take control, be dominant. So these are some of the things that men are taught as children in regards to all forms of violence, not only just sexual abuse. Domestic violence is included. You know, so we really have to start to think about how our society as a whole, or as our community, how we view these things, and what we teach children, boys, about being men. Frequent issues and problems faced by adult survivors of sexual abuse. So I'm going to go into a greater detail. I have several slides in regards to this, but anxiety and confusion, depression. Not only did I experience sexual abuse, I also experienced child physical abuse and emotional abuse. So as an adult, I was clinically depressed, where often I would sleep for 3 days, became very verbal at friends who would come and check on me. All I wanted to do was sleep. I was suicidal. I had a low self-esteem. I carried a lot of shame and guilt. Um, uh, Compulsive caretaking, and that's a really common for some Native people, is that they become compulsive caretakers, where often they will take care of others so that they don't have to take a look at themselves. It could be a lot of, one of the things that I experienced when I was in therapy was the nightmares and flashbacks. Once I began to talk about my own childhood trauma, my nightmares were so awful. I would remember waking up, and one of the skills that I had to develop when this was occurring and when it was happening was my therapist wanted me to journal my nightmares, so that, because what I would do is after a nightmare, I would isolate myself. I would be fearful of going back to sleep. I couldn't control my emotions. It was really horrible. So nightmares and flashbacks really do occur when you begin to talk about trauma. I didn't experience insomnia. I slept a lot. Violence or fear of violence, discomfort with being touched. One of the things that I help try to get people to understand is that one of the things that happened within my relationships with my current partner, I've been with my partner for 6 years. What I didn't realize what I was doing was every time he would want to just give me a hug, or wanted to just like cuddle when we were in bed, one thing that I would do is I would push his arm away and didn't realize that I was doing that until finally he asked me, why do you do that? And so then I had to think about why I was doing that, because often one of the things I tell people is that when a child is sexually abused, will grow up feeling uncomfortable when people touch them, even with a simple hug. Often, sometimes, it's very important, I shouldn't say often, but it's very important that you ask the individual if it's okay to give them a hug. One of the things I had to remind my partner was that it wasn't about him, it was about me, and that I needed him to ask me to be hugged or cuddled, because as a child, my rights to my own body was taken away from me. So it's like reclaiming myself and being able to say, okay, it's okay if you hug me, or, it's really important to ask permission. Compulsive sexual activity. One of the things that I like to tell people too, in regards to help people to understand my own behaviors and my own actions in regards to sexual violence, is that when I came from the reservation 18 years ago, and I moved to a big city, and I was introduced to the mainstream gay culture. I was introduced to websites, we call them hookup sites. But one of the things that I did was I became very sexually active. And so what I would do often, I'm not proud of this, but I think it's really important to know this and let people know so that they can understand. But one of my behaviors is that I would often hook up with men. I would get on the gay websites. I would hook up with other gay men or other men who identified, and I would have sex with them 3 to 5 times a day. And so I always tell people I had my foot in the door of developing a sexual addiction. But it wasn't about the sex, the reason why I was hooking up with men. I was hooking up with men because I had this thought in my head that if I gave away my body, and if they walked in the door and seen me, that they would want to be with me. So it was all about wanting to be loved. It was not about the sex. Extreme startle response, which is, another word for what we call PTSD, social alienation, inability to sustain intimacy in relationships or entering abusive relationships. One of the things I also like to say too is that someone who is sexually abused may or may not act out sexually to others. It could be their partner, it could be, someone who they're intimate with. But one of the things that I like to let people know too is that even though I didn't sexually violate my partner, but what I learned to do was I learned to be verbally abusive to him. And it was really crazy when this happened, when I knew that I was doing this to him. I love being in bookstores. I love Barnes & Noble. I spend a lot of time in there. And one day I happened to be walking by an aisle, and this book jumped out at me, The Verbally Abusive Relationship. I remember that day. And I opened it up and looked at the characteristics, and I went, wow, this is what I've been doing to my partner. So, and I didn't even know that I was doing that until I looked at those characteristics. And then I came to realize that there was more work that I needed to do. Because often what will happen too is that someone who is being abused in any form of abuse will often become the person who wants to be in control. And I didn't realize that I was that type of a person with him. So it was really difficult for him and I in the beginning to begin to have this conversation and for me to take a look at the things that I've said and did to him, getting angry with him, yelling at him, trying to be in control. And once that I came to realize and accept those are the behaviors that I did, it helped me to understand and be able to communicate with him in a much more healthier way. That goes to what as an adult, becoming abusers and our protectors, alcohol, drug abuse. There was a time in my life when I didn't want to deal with my own child sexual abuse, that I had my foot in the door to becoming an alcoholic, sex addiction, what I explained earlier about my own behaviors, compulsive behaviors. One of the things that I also did was I felt I love shoes, I love clothes, and when I wasn't dealing with my childhood trauma, there were many times that I did compulsive shopping. I bought things that I didn't need. So even today, knowing my own reminders of my child sexual abuse, so I like to give an example of that. When I go out shopping and there's something that I really, really like, I have to stand there and I have to do some self-talk with myself. Or I become compulsive in buying things. So I have to stand there and repeatedly ask myself, do you need this? Is it a want? Are you going to use it? And that will help me to make up my mind or a decision in regards to if I should really purchase that. Unrealistic and negative body image, feeling like a frightened child. The one I want to talk a little bit about is the body image. Even though I was with my partner, I've been with my partner for 6 years. In the beginning of our relationship, it took me almost a good year to be able to feel comfortable in front of him being naked because I was so ashamed of my body. I felt ugly. I didn't feel very good about myself. But once we started to really work on our relationship and he understood what I went through, I was able to feel comfortable being able to be nude in front of him. As before I didn't. I mean, I would do everything to cover my body. So these are really, really real things that happen to people that are sexually abused. I'm not saying that it happens to everybody, but I want people to be familiar with some of the actions and behaviors. And that's one of the reasons why I share my own story. Inability to communicate effectively and in a healthy way. That was one of the things that I struggled with my partner, having to even learn, and it was crazy because, I've been a therapist now for 7, 8 years. And one of the things that I talk about is that I should have known these things when I've been in my relationship with my partner, because I specialize in marriage family therapy. But one of the things that I'm reminded by my therapeutic friends as well as my own therapist that I've done some continuous work that I still do, is that she always reminds me that I'm human and that I do not have all the answers. What I can do is figure out the answers for me. And to be okay with it if I don't have the answers. Often people who are sexually abused will use pornographic materials or pornographic websites, adult website and chat rooms. I mean, that's some of the things that I talked about earlier. Now, here are some of the mental health disorders that adult males will suffer with in regards to sexual abuse. Dysthymia. Dysthymia is a chronic depressed mood, major depression, much more severe than dysthymia and PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And some of the things that I talked about earlier in some of the things that adults experiences, part of the post-traumatic stress disorder in when I was talking about being touched or startled, even what also affected me was people raising their voices around me. That would make me feel really uncomfortable, and it would trigger some fear into me. So I had to be aware of all of this. Now, one of the things that I like to talk about too, because I try to spend as much time with elders. Elders help me to learn how to continue my own healing. But one of the things that an elder said to me, a Native American elder woman said to me, was in order for us as Indian people to help our communities heal, one of the things that is important is if we want to get away from the Western way of thinking or the colonized way of thinking, is that we need to stop calling the people who we work with as clients, but call them relatives. And another thing she also told me too is when I was talking and I was visiting with her and I was talking about some of my own triggers, one of the things she said to me, she said is, if we want to get away from that colonized way of thinking, I'm going to ask you to stop using the word trigger, because trigger is a lot of power. And she said, I think it's important for you to start saying reminders. So if you can sort of think about the trigger sounds more powerful, right? Reminder is less. So as I talk about this, I try to explain that to people, and I use that for my own self in regards to working with Indian people and even, working with myself. It's important to know that not all issues and problems are the same with all adult survivors of child sexual abuse. Each individual is different with similarities. So how do we help men and boys heal? As I said earlier, is to create a safe place for the adult male and child to tell their story. Now, one of the things that I remind people not to do is to push people to tell their story, but to create a safe place for them to make the decision to when they want to tell their story. Compassion, as a Native person, and thinking about my own Dakota values, one of the things that I'm always reminded is, and I feel, and I know that I'm very compassionate to people, because if I wasn't compassionate to people, I wouldn't be doing the work that I'm doing. But one of the things that I've been also reminded of is to have self-compassion. Now, there's been studies done in regards to self-compassion. Victims of sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional, mental abuse, the study states that people who experience that have a hard time having self-compassion, but will often have a lot of compassion to others. So that's one of the things that I work on daily, is to have self-compassion, because that's really important. I mean, that's a part of healing. Empathy, really truly understanding what a person experiences when they're sexually abused. There's just so much things that need to be addressed in regards to that, you know, and breaking down stigma about child sexual abuse, male child sexual abuse. It's a topic we don't talk about. I feel it's very important to talk about in the work that I've done in regards to working with both heterosexual males and two-spirit males. It's very hard to talk about this abuse. So I'm always thinking of creating this safe place for them to begin their own healing, educate and awareness. That's really important. And when we talk about education and awareness is with the things that I just addressed today in regards to what children and male adults experience being sexually abused. Encourage and support individuals to discuss their child sexual abuse. When they're ready, ask them, what do you need? How can I help you through this process? What do you need me to do? What would you like to do? Because one of the things that I know of in working with Native American people is that often sometimes I feel that I know what they need. I make this assumption, and as a human being, you know, in the helping field, I'm always making assumptions about what people need. But really, just asking them, what do you need? That's part of creating safety, because often sometimes, like I said, we assume what people need, and that's not always the right way of doing things. Change the way we talk and think about individuals who have experienced child sexual abuse. Now and that's part of the stigma part, you know. One thing that I like to say, and I've, you know, been challenged in regards to this, but one of the things that I like to say is that nobody wakes up one day and says, I'm going to molest someone, or I am going to do this sexual act on someone. Nobody does those things unless it happened to them, if they do not seek the help that they need. You know, but it does not take away the behaviors that have happened. You know, and that's one of the things that I had to work through too in regards to my own sexual abuse, learning how to forgive myself. I never sexually abused anyone, but what I did was I abused myself. And so not only did I have to learn how to forgive my perpetrators, but I also had to learn how to forgive myself in regards to carrying this stuff for years and not knowing how to deal with it and cope with it. And so I acted out my own behaviors in different ways through alcohol and drugs, through my own sexual behaviors. So learning how to address those things and finding a way to healing was very important to me. It's also important to remember that not all victims of child sexual abuse become abusers, but they can become abusers in different ways, like what I explained, how I became verbally abusive to my partner. Now, these things have helped me heal and continue to help me heal, and they're very important to me as a Native person. Going into the Sweat Lodge, being a part of ceremony has helped me heal. And if we can create that space and that place for an individual who wants to be culturally and spiritually connected to our Native ways, the Sweat Lodge is a great way of healing. Support groups. There is some support groups out there. There's not a lot of support groups, but there is support groups out there. Talking with elders. That's one of the things that is really, really important to me in regards to talking with elders. Elders teach me good ways of healing, helping me to address my own issues in regards to this. And like I said earlier, just having a lot of compassion and understanding of victims of sexual abuse. And often men are forgotten. Boys are forgotten when it comes to sexual abuse. And like I said earlier, this is a topic that really needs to be talked about more often. And learning how to break down those stigmas, break down those barriers, to encourage others to talk about. And that's one of the reasons why I tell my story. What I tell people is I don't want people to feel sorry for me. That's not my purpose. My purpose is to encourage, support healing within our tribal communities. As Kate said earlier, I know there wasn't a lot of time for me to answer some questions, but if you have any questions and would like to ask them, I will, as quickly as I possibly can, answer the questions. Please reach out by email. But again, I would really encourage individuals to sort of really take a look at the abuse part of it. And like I said, there is not a lot of research out there in regards to sexual abuse of men and boys. I wish there was, but there isn't. But I think healing begins when an individual has the ability to stand up and talk about their own sexual abuse, who identify as male or a child. I've also attached some resources that if anyone is interested in doing some more study or educating or reading on sexual abuse, Abused Boys is one of them, the Neglected Victims of Sexual Abuse by Nick Hunter. Victims No Longer, the Classic Guide for Men Recovering from Sexual Child Abuse by Mike Liu. Sex Addiction, a Basic Guide to Healing from Sex, Porn, and Love Addiction, and Breaking the Cycle. Because it's really important to know that there is a high probability that an individual who experiences, a child who experiences child sexual abuse can grow up to become addicted to sex. So I'm not saying every individual ends up like that, but there's a probability. So it's really important to know these things. I hope that this webinar was helpful to others. Please, again, if you have any questions or concerns, please reach out to me, and I will most definitely respond to your email. All my information is at the beginning of the presentation, and I also do have a website too, so that you can also take a look at some of the work that I've done and what I'm currently doing. Let me check. Let me see here. There's a question by Val. I'm going to try to answer these questions quickly before we leave the session. Valerie Stone asks, when sexual abuse is discussed in therapy, are therapists explicitly addressing the role of colonization and sexual abuse of Native Americans, Alaskan Natives, often through residential schools? I am not too sure, but one of the things that I really strongly would like to say in regards to people who are non-Native, who are working with Native people, it's really important to understand the impact of colonization and the impact of historical and intergenerational trauma on adult males. That's a really broad question. But what I do is I encourage individuals to get as much training as they possibly can so that they can understand, and also to know that males and boys experience trauma in different ways. One of the things I always say is sometimes I feel that sometimes we can compare trauma, and we should never compare trauma. Are there any workbooks that you would recommend? I have not come across any workbooks. Like I said, I've done a lot of my own reading and research, and like I said, there's not a lot of helpful resources out there except what I gave. I wish there was more studies that were done. Would you say that healing is ongoing, and does trauma skills help lessen the hypervigilant? Yes. For me, as a person who's still healing from my own trauma as a child, I continuously believe that I heal every day. I do not believe that I will be completely healed. What I have learned to do is to learn how to cope and address memories or reminders of what I experienced as a child. If I'm able to recognize it right away, then I'm able to change my thoughts, or because I still struggle. I still struggle with being depressed. I still struggle with my own abuse that I experience. But as long as I can recognize it, I do a lot of self-talk. So I talk through whatever I'm going through. But yes, I do believe that it's a continuous healing process. For me it is, but I'm not going to say for everyone else, but I do believe that it is. Are there any treatment centers specific to sexual addiction or trauma in regard to child sexual abuse? Often general treatment centers are not comfortable treating this type of addiction. I believe there is. I haven't done any research in regards to these centers, but that's one of the things that when we treat addictions, that it's important to also learn how to help others to be able to treat others who are suffering from child sexual abuse. It's kind of frustrating sometimes because I don't think we spend a lot of time addressing when someone wants to address this, so we need to learn how to do that. Okay, can you repeat your comment on how to talk to survivors differently, not asking them what they need? Okay, so what I said earlier was that we as therapists often sometimes assume what we think people need. What we don't do is we don't ask them what they need. What would they like? And the reason why I say that is that when we do that, we take their power away from them, because really inside of us, we know what we need and what we want in order to heal. We just need to be asked, because sometimes we're not, we don't have the ability to respond quickly like that. And so when we give the ability to someone to tell us what they need, we're listening to them, they're taking the lead, and often sometimes, I mean, I've done that. I've always tried to take the lead in thinking what one of my client or one of my relatives may need, but that doesn't always work, because then often sometimes they're not heard. So I hope that was helpful. But that's how I do my own therapy when I work with Indian people, is that it's important for me to ask them what they need, not what I think that they need. What do they want? What would help them to heal? If they want to meet with elders, I'll ask them, would you like me to set something up for them? You know, all of that, etc. I wish we had more time to talk about this. It's 12:58. So again, if you have any more questions or concerns, please do not hesitate to send me an email, and I will quickly answer them
Wonderful.
as I
Thank
can.
you so much,
Again,
Lenny.
thank
That
you.
was a really wonderful presentation, and yeah, I hope it was hopeful and positive for those listening. That there are lots of things that we can do to support those around us who might have experienced abuse. So thanks again for joining us. And as I mentioned earlier, we will be sending a follow-up email to everyone who attended. And it will include a request form for CEUs and a link to a short survey. And it will also include the handouts and a link to the recording. So if you know anyone who might benefit from this content, please feel free to send the recording on to them. And thanks again, Lenny. That was just a really important message, and I thank you so much for sharing it with us. And with that, we will say goodbye, and thanks again to everyone for joining us. And Lenny, I'll let you say goodbye as well.
Thank you, everyone. Please take care. Again, like I said, please reach out if you have
Wonderful.
any
Thanks
questions
again,
or
and we'll
concerns.
hope to see you all at our next webinar.